The Bermuda Triangle, the truth behind the legend. The deadliest triangle in the world. Legend says over 1,000 people have vanished inside one triangle of ocean since 1945. No wreckage, no bodies, almost no explanation. Ships gone in calm seas. A squadron of Navy bombers gone in clear weather. Even the plane sent to rescue them, also gone. For 60 years, the story got wilder every time someone retold it. Sea monsters, lost cities, even aliens pulling ships beneath the waves. Tonight, we're doing something most Bermuda Triangle videos won't. Showing you exactly what's true, what's exaggerated, and what was invented outright. If that's your kind of history, hit subscribe now. We're just getting started. This is the real history behind Flight 19, the USS Cyclops, and half a dozen other disappearances, verified against Navy records and Coast Guard files. It's also the story of one journalist who invented a legend, one best-selling author who sold millions of copies of it, and one librarian who tore it apart. Because here's the twist nobody tells you. The numbers say this stretch of ocean isn't actually more dangerous than any other. So why do these stories still terrify people almost a century later? Stick around. The real answer is stranger than the myth. We start in 1492 with the very first log entry describing something strange in these waters, written by a man crossing the Atlantic for the first time. 4 centuries before anyone called it the Bermuda Triangle, its legend had already begun. Columbus and the Sargasso Sea. September 1492. Christopher Columbus and his 3 ships were deep into the Atlantic, weeks from any land anyone in Europe had ever charted. That's when his ships sailed into something strange. A vast, floating meadow of golden brown seaweed stretching farther than anyone could see. It's called the Sargasso Sea, not bounded by land at all, but by ocean currents, and it sits almost entirely inside what we now call the Triangle. Some of his sailors panicked, convinced the weeds would tangle their rudders and strand them forever in the middle of nowhere. Then his compass started doing something it wasn't supposed to do. The needle drifted, disagreeing with the North Star by a full degree. Columbus hid it from his crew, worried the news alone might start a mutiny this far from home. That night, one of his lookouts reported something else, a strange light flickering low on the horizon, rising and falling like a torch. Historians now know exactly what caused both. The compass drift is called magnetic declination, a normal, predictable difference between true north and magnetic north. And the light was probably nothing stranger than a bonfire on a distant island or bioluminescent plankton glowing in the ship's wake. No sea monster, no portal, just an unfamiliar ocean doing exactly what oceans do, and a crew far from home, primed to be afraid. Columbus made it through safely. Days later, his lookout finally spotted land, and the Sargasso Sea passed into legend as the first strange chapter of this story. But the real legend, the one people actually mean when they say Bermuda Triangle, wouldn't begin for another 4.5 centuries. Defining the triangle. So, where exactly is the Bermuda Triangle? The honest answer, nobody fully agrees, because it was never an official place to begin with. Most versions draw a rough triangle between Miami, Florida, the island of Bermuda, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. That's roughly 500,000 square miles of open Atlantic, one of the busiest shipping and flight corridors on the entire planet. And that traffic volume matters. The more ships and planes that pass through anywhere, the more incidents you'll statistically find there, triangle or not. The region also sits directly in Hurricane Alley, where tropical storms regularly form and strengthen on their way toward the U.S. coast. Underneath the surface, the seafloor drops away into some of the deepest trenches in the Atlantic, over 5 miles down in places. And running right through the middle of it all is the Gulf Stream, a fast, warm ocean current capable of erasing wreckage and evidence within days. Heavy traffic, sudden storms, a fast-moving current, and some of the deepest water on Earth. That's a lot of ordinary danger, no myth required. But in the early 20th century, nobody was thinking about statistics. They were just trying to explain why ships kept disappearing without a trace. Our first real case begins in January 1921, off the coast of North Carolina. A ship found completely intact and completely empty. The ghost ship of Diamond Shoals. The Carroll A Deering was a 5-masted schooner, one of the last great wooden sailing ships still hauling cargo up and down the American coast. In January 1921, she was sailing home from Brazil, loaded with coal, under a captain who'd only taken command a few months earlier. On January 29th, she passed a lightship off North Carolina, and a crewman shouted through a megaphone that they'd lost their anchors in a storm. The lightship keeper thought it was strange. The crew on deck looked like they were running the ship themselves, with no officers giving orders. 2 days later, the Deering ran hard aground on Diamond Shoals, sails still set, exactly as if the crew had simply walked away mid-voyage. When the Coast Guard finally boarded her, they found a meal cooking on the stove, but not a single person anywhere on board. The lifeboats were gone. So were the ship's papers, her navigation charts, and both anchors. But there was no sign of struggle, no blood, nothing broken. Rumors exploded almost overnight. Pirates, rum runners during Prohibition, even a mutiny. One newspaper even printed a mysterious note claimed to be found in a bottle. That message in a bottle claim was investigated and later dismissed by the very Coast Guard officer who looked into it. Most historians consider it a hoax. The real Coast Guard investigator at the time had a simpler theory: violent winter storms, a ship in distress, and a desperate call to abandon ship. No lifeboat built in 1921 could have survived those seas. If the crew launched one trying to reach shore 9 miles away, it likely capsized in minutes. It's a tragedy, not a mystery. But almost nobody remembered it that way. They remembered the empty ship, the cooking food, the missing crew. The Carroll A Deering became one of the first ghost ship legends tied to this stretch of ocean, decades before anyone gave the region a name. The Collier that vanished, USS Cyclops. 3 years earlier, in 1918, America was fighting in World War I, and the U.S. Navy had a massive supply ship called the USS Cyclops. She was 542 feet long, one of the largest ships in the entire Navy, built to haul coal and supplies across the Atlantic. In early March 1918, she left Brazil loaded with 10,800 tons of manganese ore, a critical mineral for manufacturing wartime munitions. On board were 306 people. Her crew, plus passengers including the American Consul General to Brazil and his family. She made a stop at Barbados on March 3rd and 4th to take on fresh water and supplies. Nothing seemed unusual. Then she sailed north and vanished. No storm was reported in the area. No distress signal was ever received. The Cyclops simply never arrived in Baltimore and never radioed again. The Navy searched for weeks. Not a single piece of wreckage, oil slick or lifeboat was ever recovered. Not then, and not in the century since. It remains the single largest loss of life in U.S. Navy history, not directly caused by combat. 306 people, gone without one clue. Wartime rumors blamed a German U-boat, but post-war German naval records, examined after the war ended, showed no submarine anywhere near her route. Investigators later found real red flags. The Cyclops had a cracked cylinder limiting her speed, and she was loaded well beyond her normal capacity. Manganese ore is also unusually dense. If it shifted in rough seas, it could destabilize a ship far faster than her crew could react. One naval historian called it a synergy of failures. Engine trouble, an overloaded hull, unfamiliar cargo, and possibly a rogue wave, all at once. It's a far less thrilling explanation than a sea monster, But it's the one the actual evidence, a century later, still points to. And the story doesn't end there. 23 years later, two of the Cyclops' own sister ships vanished in almost exactly the same way. Sister ships, same fate. The Cyclops had two sister ships built to the identical design, the USS Proteus and the USS Nereus. By World War II, both had been converted from coal haulers into cargo ships, still hauling heavy ore, just like their lost sister once had. In November 1941, the Proteus vanished on a run from the Caribbean toward the United States, loaded with the same kind of dense ore. 1 month later, in December 1941, her sister ship Nereus vanished on nearly the same route, carrying nearly the same cargo. 3 sister ships, 3 total disappearances. No wreckage from any of them has ever been confirmed found, even with modern sonar technology. It sounds almost impossible until you remember these ships shared the exact same design flaw and the exact same risky cargo. Naval engineers now believe all 3 sank the same ordinary way, overloaded, structurally strained, and caught in heavy Atlantic weather. 3 identical ships losing themselves in the same waters isn't proof of a curse. It's proof of a design problem nobody caught in time. Flight 19, The Lost Patrol. December 5th, 1945. 5 Navy torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale for a routine training flight. Practice bombing runs over shallow reefs. 14 men were aboard. Most were trainees. Their flight leader was a combat veteran with 2,500 flying hours behind him. The plan was simple. Bomb a practice target, fly east, then turn and fly home. They'd done routes like this dozens of times before. They completed the bombing run without any trouble. Then, on the return leg, something changed. The flight leader radioed that his compasses weren't agreeing. He believed he was somewhere over the Florida Keys. In reality, based on later analysis, he was almost certainly much farther north than east than that. A junior pilot in the formation radioed that he thought they should fly west, toward the setting sun, to reach land faster. As the senior officer, the flight leader overruled him. He was certain they needed to keep flying in the direction he believed was correct. Back at the base, the control tower picked up fragments of the radio traffic, confusion, disagreement, and a slowly dropping fuel gauge. As the sun set, the weather turned. Rough seas, rising wind, and thickening clouds made an already confused situation far more dangerous. The flight leader's last confirmed radio message described plans to ditch together in the ocean once they ran out of fuel. Then radio contact went silent. All 5 planes and all 14 men were gone. Not one radio call, one raft, or one body was ever recovered. The Navy launched an immediate search. Ships, aircraft, and coastal patrols combing the ocean through the night and for days afterward. The official investigation ultimately concluded pilot disorientation was the most likely cause. A veteran flyer who simply misjudged his own position. It happens more than people realize. Even experienced pilots can lose track of direction over featureless open ocean, especially with equipment trouble. There's also a detail rarely mentioned. This specific flight leader had gotten lost and ditched a plane once before, years earlier in the Pacific. That history doesn't prove anything by itself, but it does support a simple human explanation over a supernatural one. Some writers later claimed the plane's wreckage was eventually found in shallow water off Florida. That claim has been investigated and firmly debunked. The wreck divers found belonged to different training aircraft entirely, lost in a completely separate, unrelated accident years apart. So what really happened to Flight 19 likely comes down to bad luck stacked on bad luck. Broken compasses, a command decision, worsening weather. It's tragic, it's human, and it's exactly the kind of story that, retold enough times, turns into something much stranger than it really was. The rescue plane that also vanished. Here's the detail that made Flight 19 truly famous. The plane sent out to search for them also disappeared that same night. It was a Mariner flying boat, nicknamed by its own crews a flying gas tank because of how much fuel it carried. 13 men took off that night, specifically to search for the missing bombers. Radio contact with them was lost within the hour. A nearby merchant ship reported seeing a bright explosion and a spreading pool of burning fuel on the ocean surface around the same time. That single detail explains almost everything. Mariner aircraft had a documented history of fuel vapor buildup that could ignite from a single spark. Investigators believe the rescue plane most likely exploded shortly after takeoff, a mechanical tragedy unrelated to whatever happened to Flight 19 itself. Two separate tragedies on the same night, in the same stretch of ocean. That coincidence alone is what really launched the legend. 19 men vanished searching for 14 others. 33 men gone in a single night, and not one piece of definitive wreckage ever confirmed. Vanishing from the sky, Star Tiger and Star Ariel. 3 years later, the Triangle claimed two commercial airliners, both from the same British airline, both flying nearly the same route. On January 30th, 1948, the Star Tiger was flying from the Azores to Bermuda, carrying 25 passengers and 6 crew. Weather was rough, but manageable. The crew radioed a routine position report, well within normal range of their destination. That was the last anyone ever heard from the Star Tiger. No distress call, no wreckage, no survivors. 31 people simply gone. Almost exactly 1 year later, on January 17th, 1949, the Star Ariel, a sister aircraft on the same airline, vanished the same way. This time the weather was perfect. Clear skies, light wind, excellent visibility. The pilot's last message was completely routine. 1 hour after takeoff, the plane and its 20 passengers and crew vanished from radio contact entirely, in perfect flying conditions. 2 identical aircraft, 2 total disappearances. No wreckage from either has ever been found, even decades later. Investigators focused on the aircraft type itself. The Avro Tudor, a model already known for design and mechanical problems. Its cabin heating system ran fuel lines dangerously close to hot exhaust pipes. A known fire risk investigators had flagged before either crash. A fire or explosion in flight could destroy an aircraft and its radio equipment almost instantly, with no time to send a distress call. British investigators eventually grounded the entire Avro Tudor passenger fleet, effectively agreeing the aircraft itself was the most likely culprit. That's a devastating, very human kind of tragedy. A flawed aircraft design, not a mysterious force, quietly claiming 51 lives in 1 year. But in 1948 and 1949, nobody was talking about heating systems. They were talking about 2 planes swallowed by the same patch of ocean, 2 ships, 2 Collier sisters, 14 airmen, 13 more searching for them, 51 airline passengers. The body count was climbing. And so was the legend. The DC-3 that melted into thin air. December 28, 1948. A DC-3 passenger plane took off from Puerto Rico bound for Miami, carrying 29 people and an experienced pilot. About 50 miles from Miami, the pilot radioed the tower for landing instructions. Everything sounded completely normal. Fuel was reportedly fine. Then, the plane never landed. It never called again. No wreckage, no debris field, no oil slick was ever located, despite an intense search. Investigators later raised a real possibility, often left out of the legend. The plane's radio compass batteries may have been dangerously low. A pilot relying on failing instruments at night, over featureless dark water, can drift miles off course without any obvious warning sign. Some writers claimed this flight proved something supernatural. Investigators who reviewed the case file found a far more familiar explanation. Equipment failure at night over open water. It's genuinely tragic, 29 lives lost close enough to see the coastline lights, yet somehow never making it home. But we don't know exactly what happened isn't the same thing as something supernatural happened. The ocean doesn't need a curse to be dangerous at night. By 1950, the region already had 5 major mystery cases on record. All it needed now was a name and someone willing to sell it. The man who named the legend. In February 1964, a pulp magazine writer sat down to connect every one of these separate stories into one single terrifying theory. His article ran on the cover of a magazine known for sensational tales of mystery and the unexplained. And he gave the region its name, the Bermuda Triangle. The headline read, "The very first time those 3 words had ever appeared together in print." The article grouped Flight 19, the Cyclops, and several other cases together, hinting at a shared, unexplained force connecting them all. It sold extremely well, and 10 years later, another writer took that idea and turned it into a publishing phenomenon. In 1974, his book on the subject became an international bestseller, selling millions of copies and pushing the legend into mainstream pop culture. The book leaned heavily into unexplained force theories, strange magnetic anomalies, vanishing electronics, even hints at something beyond ordinary science. It arrived at exactly the right cultural moment. The 1970s, an era fascinated by UFOs, ancient astronauts, and unexplained phenomena of every kind. Within a few years, Bermuda Triangle wasn't just a magazine headline anymore. It was a household phrase known across the entire country. There was just one problem. Much of what that best-selling book claimed didn't hold up when anyone actually checked the original records. Dates were wrong. Locations were sometimes hundreds of miles outside the actual triangle. Some mysterious details were simply invented outright. One case, still repeated by legend tellers today, described a ghost ship called the Ellen Austin, found abandoned with a prize crew that then vanished too. Researchers have never found any credible original record of that ship or that event existing at all. It appears to be pure invention. By the mid-1970s, the legend had grown far bigger than the facts underneath it. It would take one determined librarian to start pulling it apart. Debunking the Legend. His name doesn't matter as much as his method. He decided to check every single Bermuda Triangle story against its original source documents. No secondhand retellings, no quoting other paranormal authors, just original newspapers, insurance records, weather reports, and official investigation files. It took him years. What he found, case after case, was the same pattern: exaggeration, missing context, and sometimes outright fabrication. Some disappeared without a trace. Ships had actually reported bad weather in the area at the time, details conveniently left out of later retellings. Other ships credited to the Triangle's mystery had, on closer inspection, wrecked hundreds of miles outside its boundaries entirely. At least one supposedly vanished ship had actually been found. Its wreckage was on record in a maritime archive the whole time. His conclusion, published in 1975, was blunt. The Bermuda Triangle mystery was created, manufactured by sloppy research, not by anything happening at sea. He didn't deny that real ships and real planes had been lost. He simply showed that the total number wasn't unusual for the area. His book didn't sell nearly as many copies as the bestseller it was answering. Debunking a legend is rarely as exciting as the legend itself. But among researchers, historians, and insurance analysts, his work became the definitive reference whenever someone actually checked the claims. He wasn't the only skeptic. Naval historians, aviation investigators, and meteorologists had quietly reached similar conclusions for decades, case by case. The pattern that kept emerging was almost always the same: real tragedy, ordinary causes, and a story that grew more dramatic with every retelling. Human error explained several cases. Mechanical failure explained others. Sudden severe weather explained the rest, almost without exception. None of that makes for as thrilling a campfire story as a sea monster or a magnetic vortex. But it happens to be what the paper trail actually shows. So if the evidence points to ordinary tragedy, why does this region still have a worse reputation than almost anywhere else on Earth? The answer isn't hiding in the ocean. It's hiding in the numbers, and it's time we actually looked at them properly. What the numbers actually say. The U.S. Coast Guard has said publicly, more than once, that it does not recognize the Bermuda Triangle as a distinctly hazardous region at all. That's not a guess. It's based on decades of search and rescue case records the Coast Guard itself maintains for the entire Atlantic. Lloyd's of London, one of the world's oldest and most respected marine insurers, reached the exact same conclusion decades ago. In 1997, they confirmed that shipping losses in the Triangle matched the rate in other oceans, and premiums for crossing it were never raised. Think about that for a moment. If insurers who profit from accurately pricing risk saw nothing unusual, that's about as strong a signal as you can get. A major maritime safety review in the early 2020s ranked the world's most dangerous shipping regions. The Bermuda Triangle didn't crack the top 10. The waters near South China and Indonesia, it turns out, are statistically far riskier for modern shipping than anything in the Western Atlantic. So why does the Triangle still feel more dangerous? Because busy areas simply generate more total incidents, and more incidents mean more headlines. It's a statistics trick psychologists call the availability heuristic. We judge risk by how easily we can recall an example, not by real numbers. A single vivid disappearance sticks in memory far more than 10,000 routine, uneventful crossings that happened the exact same year. Add heavy tourist and recreational boat traffic, frequent small craft accidents, and hurricane season, and the region simply produces more stories to tell. None of that requires a curse. It just requires paying attention to which parts of a true story people choose to remember. The real villain: weather and geography. If there's a true villain behind these disappearances, it isn't hiding underwater. It's written across 100 years of weather reports. The Western Atlantic sits directly in the path of Atlantic hurricanes, which regularly spin up, intensify, and shift course with little warning. Before modern satellites, sailors and pilots often had only a few hours' notice before a storm turned genuinely life-threatening. The region is also famous for sudden, localized microbursts, violent downdrafts that can slam a small plane or boat with almost no warning. Add the Gulf Stream, a current that can move at over 5 miles per hour, and wreckage can drift hundreds of miles before anyone finds it, if it's ever found. That single fact solves more no wreckage ever found mysteries than any theory involving vortexes or portals ever could. The seafloor itself is another factor. Parts of the Triangle plunge into the Puerto Rico Trench, one of the deepest points in the entire Atlantic. At depths over 5 miles, standard search equipment from most of the 20th century simply couldn't reach the ocean floor at all. Even today, locating small wreckage at that depth requires specialized deep-sea equipment that most search and rescue missions never have on hand. So, a ship or plane can go down in a real ordinary storm and simply never be found again, not because of mystery, but because of math. Shallow water causes its own problems too. Reefs and shoals near Bermuda and the Bahamas have wrecked ships for 400 years, long before any legend existed. Some of the very first shipwrecks ever recorded in the Americas happened right here, not because of any curse, but because the reefs are simply dangerous. Put it all together: hurricanes, microbursts, a fast current, extreme depth, and treacherous shallow reefs, all in one heavily traveled stretch of ocean. That's not a paranormal hotspot. That's simply one of the most geographically demanding stretches of ocean on the entire planet. Science weighs in: rogue waves and methane myths. Two scientific-sounding theories keep resurfacing whenever this topic comes up online. Let's actually test them against the evidence. First, methane hydrates, frozen pockets of gas trapped under the seafloor that, in theory, could erupt and instantly sink a ship above them. It's real geology. This can genuinely happen in certain places on Earth. The problem is the timeline. Nothing like it has occurred here in 15,000 years. Geologists studying the actual seafloor beneath the triangle have found no evidence of a large recent methane release anywhere near the major disappearance sites. It's a compelling idea for a documentary. It is not based on current evidence, what actually sank the Cyclops or any other ship in this story. Second theory, rogue waves, freak walls of water, sometimes reportedly reaching close to 100 feet, capable of overwhelming even large ships. Unlike methane eruptions, rogue waves are scientifically confirmed and have been measured by ocean buoys in multiple locations around the world. Recent research has even modeled how colliding storm systems in this exact region could theoretically generate an unusually large rogue wave. It's a genuinely plausible explanation for at least some of these losses. Real physics, not a supernatural force, but still rare and unpredictable. Third and final theory, compass errors caused by strange magnetic anomalies unique to this region, throwing off navigation. Here's the twist. The Bermuda Triangle is actually one of the very few places on Earth where true north and magnetic north line up almost perfectly. That should make navigation easier here, not harder, the exact opposite of what the compass anomaly theory claims. So among the popular scientific explanations, methane hydrates don't fit the timeline, and the compass theory gets the geography backwards. Rogue waves remain a genuinely credible, if rare, natural explanation. One confirmed by real ocean science, just not a common everyday event. No vortex, no portal, no ancient curse. Just physics, geology, and weather. Some rare, some common, and every one of them explainable. But science alone doesn't explain every case. Some of the biggest ones still come down to a much older, much simpler cause: human error. Human error and hard truths. Go back through every major case in this video, and one factor keeps appearing more than any storm, current, or magnetic anomaly ever could: people. The Flight 19 leader misjudged his position and overruled a subordinate, who was, based on later analysis, likely correct. The Cyclops sailed overloaded, with a known mechanical fault, into unpredictable weather, under wartime pressure to keep moving. The Avro Tudor airliners flew with a known design flaw that regulators hadn't yet forced airlines to fix. The DC-3 pilot may have trusted failing equipment on a dark night over water, with no visual reference to correct his course. None of these were reckless people. They were trained professionals, making reasonable decisions with the imperfect information available to them at the time. That's actually the hardest part of this whole story to sit with. Sometimes disasters happen, and there's no single villain, natural or supernatural, to blame. Human factors researchers have a name for this pattern: the Swiss cheese model, where several small unrelated failures line up perfectly to cause disaster. A cracked engine part alone doesn't sink a ship. Overload alone might not either, but stack 3 or 4 small failures together, and tragedy follows. That's a far less satisfying story than a monster or a vortex. It's also, according to nearly every serious investigation, the truest one. It's worth remembering, too. Every single person in these stories was real. Real families waited for radio calls that never came, turning their disappearances into a spooky campfire story without ever mentioning the actual investigations does a real disservice to what they went through. That doesn't mean the mystery isn't compelling. It means the real explanation deserves just as much attention as the legend that grew around it. So, after all the evidence, all the records, and nearly a century of investigation, what's the honest, complete answer to what happened here? So what really happened? There is no single answer, because there was never a single mystery. There were multiple separate tragedies that got bundled together by a magazine headline. The Carroll A Deering, almost certainly a storm-forced abandonment, her crew lost trying to reach shore in a doomed lifeboat. The USS Cyclops and her sister ships, mechanical strain, dangerous cargo, and severe weather, striking 3 nearly identical vessels the same way. Flight 19, navigational confusion compounded by a command decision, worsened by failing light and a sudden storm. The Rescue Mariner, a documented mechanical hazard, almost certainly an explosion shortly after takeoff, unrelated to the planes it was searching for. Star Tiger and Star Ariel, a flawed aircraft design that British investigators grounded soon after, once the pattern became impossible to ignore. The DC-3, quite possibly failing instruments on a dark night, over water, with no lights on the horizon to correct by. Different decades, different vehicles, different exact causes. The only thing genuinely shared between them is the ocean they happened to cross. And the numbers, from the Coast Guard to Lloyd's of London, say that ocean isn't statistically more dangerous than any other well-traveled sea. What made this region legendary wasn't a hidden force beneath the waves. It was a magazine writer with a great headline and a bestseller that ran with it. And what finally corrected the record wasn't a scientific breakthrough. It was one librarian willing to spend years checking the receipts. That's the real story behind the Bermuda Triangle. A century of ordinary tragedy and 50 years of a legend that outgrew the truth. The legend lives on. So why does the myth refuse to die even now, with all this evidence sitting in plain sight? Partly because mystery is simply more fun than statistics. A sea monster makes a better story than a cracked engine cylinder. Partly because the original 1970s bestseller sold so many millions of copies that its version became the default story for an entire generation. And partly because once a claim like Ellen Austin or Melted into Thin Air gets repeated enough times online, it starts to feel true by sheer repetition. That's not unique to this story. It's how most modern myths survive, not through evidence, but through how easy they are to repeat. The good news is the real story doesn't need exaggeration to be compelling. 14 missing airmen, 3 sister ships, a crew that vanished mid-meal, a librarian who spent years proving a magazine writer wrong. That's already a genuinely great story. It just happens to also be true. Today, the region remains one of the busiest, most heavily traveled stretches of ocean on Earth, crossed safely by thousands of ships and flights every single week. Cruise ships sail through it constantly. Commercial flights cross it daily. Nobody pays extra insurance, and nobody radios in reports of vanishing compasses anymore. The ocean here is exactly what it's always been. Beautiful, powerful, occasionally dangerous, and completely, thoroughly explainable. So the next time someone tells you a plane vanished into thin air out here, you'll know the real story. And it's honestly more interesting. If you want the full-sourced list of every case, every record, and every citation behind this video, it's all linked in the description below. Thanks for watching Clue Series. If you want more real history behind the world's most famous legends, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next one.